This season's draft FPL is really starting to hot up now, and we've got a sneaky Thursday night waiver deadline to contend with before two more waiver deadlines in the space of just 7 days. So let's get straight into it. Welcome back to the Draft FC podcast, the podcast website and YouTube channel dedicated to all things official draft FPL. My name is Mitch and I'm your host for another Game Week preview going over waiver options, hidden gems and general Premier League chat ahead of Game Week 13. The last Game Week was pretty fun. It was nice to have a good Spurs win to feel good about after moping for the whole international break about them. Elsewhere, results went reasonably as expected. I think Palace got a good result 2-2 away at Aston Villa. Wolves did really well to win 4-1 at Craven Cottage. Liverpool kind of lucky in the end to win 3-2 away at Southampton, and United and Amorim got his first point away at Ipswich. Odd game on Monday night between Newcastle and West Ham. Neither team particularly played well. Newcastle had a couple of chances, but I think in the end could have gone either way. But yeah, their sort of up and down topsy-turvy season really does continue. So as I said in the little intro to the intro, the waiver deadline this week will be on Thursday the 28th at 6:30 UK time. And that's obviously because we've got a Friday night game, which is Brighton against Southampton. The reason we've got a Friday night game is because there won't be any Monday night game because we roll straight into Game Week 14 on Tuesday. So means going to have to try and turn it around very, very fast over the weekend. And all being well, providing nothing else comes up, we will have to get the Game Week 14 preview out sometime on Sunday night, all being well. What that will likely mean is that I'll have to have done a large amount of the prep without watching all of the games on Sunday. So there are some really good games on Sunday too, not least finishing off with Liverpool against City. So we'll have to see how much of that I can watch whilst getting the final prep done for that Game Week preview. I think given the turnaround, as we've done over the years when it gets to this kind of stage, we won't be able to do anywhere near the kind of preview that we do for a normal game week. So, expect a relatively short 10 to 15 minute episode for that one. Now, I'm recording this one on Tuesday, the 26th of November. So any team news, injury developments, or press conference info are up to date as of then. And of course, subject to change. The main thing really that could throw spanner in the works is the European games, which are going on as I record this. Some of the players I'll be discussing in this episode include Vicario, Bailey again, Igor Thiago, Callum Wilson, plus many more. So let's get straight into it. So before we get into that, just another reminder that the 1 month free trial code is still very much alive and kicking. So if you want to get 1 month free access to Draft FC, if you haven't signed up before, you can do using the code DFCFree24, all one word, DFCFree24. For those listening on the audio, and indeed those watching on the video, that will be in the description below if you want to come back to it later. It's a really good time to take advantage of that, given the amount of games that are going to be crammed in over the next month. You'll get as much bang for your free buck as you can get. And straight into Waiver Watch, with that data coming courtesy of our dashboards on the Draft FC members area. Say all of the data that I use and throw out during these episodes is fully available to signed up members. So let's have a look at some of the players that were coming in ahead of Game Week 12. So we have Bradley, Pedro Neto, Damsgaard, Cliver, Amad Diallo, Joel Linton, Smodix and Estupinan. So a pretty good list there. And actually now that we've pivoted to looking at 10-team leagues, I prefer the look of these wavered in lists, because I think for the majority of draft managers, even if you're in an 8-team league that's very engaged, these are really the sort of players that you're going to be scrapping for week to week. And the players that were leaving, Buonanotte, who was suspended, Reece James, who I mentioned as part of the Chelsea defender section, and said that I was pretty much done with him and wasn't interested because he's just going to keep getting injured. And would you know it, by the time I think I'd finished hitting record and starting to do the editing process, it was announced that he picked up another hamstring injury. Dragusin was leaving, Dama Traore, Michael Keane, Tavernier, Dan Burn and Kadioglu. A reasonable list of ins and outs overall there. In terms of some more key injuries and suspensions this week, the first and biggest one is probably Vicario for Spurs. An announcement yesterday that he had to have a small surgical procedure for an ankle fracture that he sustained apparently during the first half of the Manchester City game. And I haven't actually gone back to see what the incident was, what the mechanism was. Yeah, clearly not good. I mean, it must have been a relatively stable injury if he was able to play the remainder of the game. But there were reports that he was limping quite badly afterwards. Now, I've seen some people kind of talking about this as if he's going to be out for 3 or 4 months. I think that's unlikely. Given the fact that he was able to play the rest of that game, it doesn't sound as though that fracture will be particularly bad. I need to try and comb through some of the highlights and find what the mechanism was. So I would be, I've kind of listed it as an unknown return date for now, but I would be guessing somewhere close to the end of January. I think he'll be largely healed by New Year, and then that gives him a few weeks to kind of work on getting that explosivity and that elasticity back in his ankle so he can dive and jump around. So, yeah, we'll see. There's not a lot of info about it yet. Belieber for Brighton was sent off, probably only relevant to managers playing fan tracks or sleep scoring, otherwise doesn't really affect FPL managers. Norgard was sent off, straight red, which means he will be out until game week 16. Again, similar boat to Belieber, 3-game ban. The relevance here is the impact it has on Brentford as a whole over that time frame. They've got games against Leicester, Villa and Newcastle, which are going to be a lot more difficult now that they have to go without their fairly reliable midfield anchor. They've got the players to make it work. It's a shame for someone like Damsgaard, and particularly draft managers that have picked him up recently, because we saw him line up as a left-sided attacker in that game at the weekend, but obviously got moved back due to the sending off. So I would expect for the next game a midfield free of Janelt, Jensen and Damsgaard, probably slightly deeper again, with the potential for a Vissa, Mbumo and Igor Thiago front three, which has been eagerly anticipated by both Brentford and draft heads alike. The other one was Reece James, who we've already mentioned. Kovacic, who didn't really have much detail other than a report that he's going to be out for around a month, which is a big miss for City in their current state. And then Hurst for Ipswich is out for an unknown amount of time. His ownership has kind of crept up after he had that big game a few weeks ago. So he was sort of a third forward for a lot of draft managers out there and needs to be moved on. And we might have an option to replace him with later in the Hidden Gems section. Into the main picks, and starting off with the defenders, and in particular, firstly, the Man United defence. They've got a home game against Everton, which is always nice for defenders. And now United are really settling into their new shape. Immediately, we should have a few to choose from. I think Amad Diallo as right wing back looks something we should see a little bit more of moving forward. The left side, probably a little less confident, but with Shaw coming back, I think he could slot in quite well, either there or as the left-sided centre-back in the back three. And he's kind of got the most availability out of the bigger names that we're familiar with ownership dropping to just 22% in 10-team leagues at the moment. But it's really tricky to guess exactly how all of those personnel are going to line up. The obvious names in De Ligt, Dalot, Mazraoui are obviously much better options if they're there, but their ownership is kind of up in the high 90s. So the odds that one of them are available in your waiver pile are probably slim. The Brighton defence, we've got Van Hecker and Estupiñán shown on screen at the moment just due to their ownership. I covered them in depth last week, so not going to go through it much again. But a home game against Southampton has to be just bread and butter in terms of waiver pickups all year round, regardless of who the opponents are. Say Van Hecker's ownership just 39%, Estupiñán 51% means that in the majority of leagues, at least one of these will be available in the waiver pile, and I'm sure that will change this weekend. Into midfield, Bailey was here last week. I had him as a bit of a buy low option, and although he didn't come away with anything at the weekend, he was fairly unlucky not to. If you just looked at The fact that he got a couple of points, you might think, well, I'll move him on. He hasn't really done anything. But so he was quite unlucky. He hit the woodwork, ended up with an expected goal involvement of 0.59 for that fixture. So on another day, he gets something there. Certainly a promising performance and worth holding even through the away trip to Chelsea this weekend, with their fixtures looking very nice between game weeks 14 to 16. And then the last midfielder in the main section here is Draft FC favourite Mohamed Kudus. Has almost served his sentence now, and after this weekend's game against Arsenal, he will be back available to play again. And his return coincides with a very nice fixture run for West Ham. They've got Leicester, Wolves, Bournemouth, Brighton and Southampton up to Boxing Day. His ownership has naturally dipped, but we saw actually across the top 100 leagues out there, his ownership crept up this week as managers are starting to smuggle him away on the bench early, ready for his return. As I said, we're a big fan here. If you've been listening to the pod, since the beginning of the season or even last season, then you'll know how much I rate him. And to be honest, Somerville hasn't really made the most of the opportunity given him with this run of games. I wouldn't say he's done anything to solidify a starting spot in that team. So I think Kudus, providing he hasn't really fallen out with the manager, should go straight back into the starting 11. And then up top, a couple of names. Someone commented on the last video that not mentioning Igor Thiago was a bit of an oversight, and I agree, it probably was. His ownership does remain fairly modest still, though, at just 18% in 10-team leagues, and sinking into even hidden gem territory for some smaller leagues. He got 20 minutes off the bench against Everton, but not really ideal coming out when your team is already down to 10 men, so you're just going to have to do a lot of running around. And he came off from that with 0 attempts on goal. So obviously he was injured way back in pre-season in a friendly match against AFC Wimbledon. At the point he came off, he'd already scored two goals that day. But let's not pretend it was any more than a pre-season game against AFC Wimbledon. Last year he was in Belgium at Club Brugge and scored 16 in 26 league appearances with an overall record there of 29 in 55. These are okay stats, but by no means sort of copy and paste at Premier League level. He is only 23 though, so this is really his chance. But given the fact Brentford haven't struggled to score goals, he's not someone they really have to rush back into the 11 until they're happy and ready for him. But I think the upside is going to be worth it, and it's certainly over a lot of the third string forwards that are going around out there. The likes of Evan Nilsson, Strand Larsen, Delap, Vardy, Raul Jimenez, I would not consider him at all over the likes of them. So he really is for those scraping the barrel for a third choice striker. The other one, and someone who also falls into this mix for a third striker option, is Callum Wilson. I promise you I did have him on the list already, even before his little substitute cameo on Monday night. He's someone I'm always interested in having if he's fit, but that is the real problem, is whether or not he can remain fit. But obviously he's just come back in time for the fixture pile-up. He's got a very good history of scoring off the bench, and so don't be put off if he doesn't start. But I think given the run of games, given the way Isak kind of has to be managed week to week as well, would not be surprised if he started one of the next sort of 2 or 3 games, and he's always good value to score when he's on the pitch. Next, on to Draft Duel. Now, again, the suggestions were flying in on the Discord channel, which is exclusive for Draft FC members, so another reason to take advantage of that free trial code if you want to get in there as well. And it's getting nice and more active week to week, and a real place, a draft university, if you will, including for myself. It's not just me chatting in there, everyone's learning from each other, which is great. But one of the suggestions included one of the players that I'll be discussing in Draft Duel. The other one didn't, so I wanted to kind of look for a player that maybe had slightly higher ownership than the player that I started with, to see whether or not they warranted having such high ownership. So the players in question, a couple of midfielders. The first one I started with was Jorginho Rutter for Brighton, and the second was Bernardo Silva for Manchester City. So if we look at the usual numbers, we can see that Jorginho's ownership in 10-team leagues is up to 82%, but for Bernardo Silva, right up there at 96%, and has been pretty much all year round. If we start with Jorginho, he's got 9 Premier League starts in a row now, 2 goals and 4 assists with an expected goal involvement so far of 3.1. So he is overperforming that a touch, but a couple of those assists are what we call fantasy assists, which means they're not truly marked assists in terms of sort of Opta data. These would be shot rebounds or winning penalties, for example, which are classed as assists in FPL. A non-penalty XG per 90, just over the 0.5 mark so far. So somewhere in the expectation of getting a return 1 in every 2 games. He's very durable, played the majority of league minutes for Leeds last season, scoring 6 and assisting 15. So his attacking output so far kind of matches that ratio from last year. He's looked excellent on the eye, playing a variety of positions, but using his attributes to really impose himself on the game wherever he's asked to play. So ownership actually peaked in Game Week 11. So there was an ever so slight dip in his ownership just before last weekend, which I don't really understand. Based on the competition he's got in the team, I've given him a very, very conservative expected minutes for the season of 2,000. And if we extrapolate that with his underlying numbers, puts him on course to get somewhere between 11 and 12 attacking returns for the season. Then to Bernardo Silva, obviously a player we are very familiar with, has been at City for donkey's years now. For me, he's always been a slightly underwhelming draft asset. He's never been someone that's particularly bothered me, and he's always just felt like one of those players who's slightly too good for the waiver pile, but probably not good enough to really hang on to in your team. Last season, though, to be fair, he did really go against that with 15 attacking returns, 6 goals and 9 assists, which is his best output in a City shirt. If we look over the last 3 seasons, he's averaging around 12 attacking returns over the year. The thing with Bernardo Silva is he gets a lot of minutes. He got just under 2,600 last year. I think with the injuries that are currently going on in the City squad, I've basically predicted him to get just as many this year too, though of course could be slightly higher than that depending on, whether he ends up sticking down with a bit of a central midfield role. The numbers this year are lagging slightly, but I think with those injuries and the fact that he's being asked to do a little bit of a different job in central midfield, rather than sort of high and wide on the right or as an attacking number 8, that could be a big factor in where his numbers go and how his sort of output looks this season. And I think that's really what we're seeing already. So I think expecting him to get anywhere near the 15 of last season is going to be optimistic. But if we purely look at the numbers and the expectation for minutes based on sort of recent years and career averages, puts him somewhere between 12 to 13 attacking returns. But just the pure subjective element of his changing role in the team, I would put it far closer to those numbers of 11 to 12 that Jorginho's on. So if we look at a verdict for that, if you look at the numbers overall, they are remarkably similar. Their underlying stats, their expected goal involvements, etc. So the only difference really in the calculations there are the expected minutes of the 2 players. Now, if you think that Jorginho Rutter is just going to be an ever-present in the Brighton team now, and he can probably get just as many minutes as Bernardo Silva will, then he smashes Bernardo for the potential output. Even if he doesn't, though, I think it's going to be, like I said, a quieter year for Bernardo Silva this year, considering the role he's playing. Though I'm not really convinced he solves that problem in central midfield, but that's a separate issue. So, Jorginho, to me, has made himself into a very solid kind of midfield 3 for a lot of standard-sized leagues. And with Brighton's fixtures now, the run-in is far, far too good for him to be in waiver piles. Even if you were in a league as small as 6 teams, I think he needs to be picked up by somebody. Let's look at some hidden gems now. And for once, we can mention a couple of goalkeepers. Now, obviously, Fraser Forster is on the list because of the injury to Vicario. There have been some all-time Premier League moments, depending on your persuasion. I guess you've got the Arsenal Invincible season. There's the Aguero goal. Adebayor running full length of the pitch to knee slide in front of the Arsenal fans when he scored against them. All sorts of big moments out there. But I think if Fraser Forster can keep a clean sheet at the weekend against Fulham, that could really be right at the top of the all-time sort of Barclays Premier League moments. Especially given the fact it's going to be behind a back four that is still going to be without Van de Ven, could be without Romero, though it sounds like he will be back. So if I had Vicario and was looking to replace with someone, Forster is an okay replacement, but actually I would be more interested in the next guy on the list, which is McCarthy for Southampton. So with Ramsdale's finger injury, he's going to be out for a few weeks. So, a Southampton shot stopper isn't actually the worst investment you could make. Now, despite conceding 3 against Liverpool, he still managed to pull out 3 FPL points from making 8 saves. It means he's averaging 3 points per game from the 3 appearances that he's made so far, which actually, if you compare that to some other regular keepers, that is a better points per game ratio than Ederson, Verbruggen and Muric. Now, it will only be a temporary sort of mercenary to bring in because the reports are that Ramsdale could be back by game week 17. But with pretty horrible fixtures on paper, it only makes him more appealing because there's going to be plenty of opportunities for him to get his hands warm and just rack up some save points for you. So do not expect clean sheets. But, if he can keep dredging out 2, 3, 4 points a game, that is not bad for a backup keeper rather than hanging on to Vicario, who hasn't, Spurs aren't really keeping that many clean sheets anyway. So certainly a move I would make if I had Vicario. No point holding on to him. In terms of defenders, Dragusin obviously in there still. He should play again, but whether you believe Spurs can keep a clean sheet with Fraser Forster in goal, that's up to you. Not someone I'm particularly interested in. And then really a look at the Wolves defence, because they've got a lovely solid fixture on now up to Christmas. Bournemouth, Everton, West Ham, Ipswich and Leicester. And they're starting to find form just in time to make the most of these kind of fixtures. So if you miss out on some of the obvious picks, your Brighton defenders, Chelsea defenders or anyone else, you can't go too far wrong, I think, from grabbing some of these Wolves guys at the moment for a bit of a short to medium term hold. Dawson and Totti are in hidden gem territory, but Semedo isn't far away with just 17% ownership, who I would rather have if he was there. And I think if you're in the likes of 12 teams plus in your league, then the Wolves defence really are going to have to factor in to your calculations. In midfield, I actually had about 6 or 7 on this list earlier today, but just in the interest of time and the turnaround, I cleaved off a few. Ismail Assar finally had a breakout game with a goal and assist against Aston Villa. The next 2 games are against Newcastle and Ipswich, which actually I think could be quite decent matchups for him on paper. And he will continue to play given the other injuries that they have. Definitely a puntier pick for larger leagues, but the record is not as exciting as he can look on the eye. So if you're in more average size leagues, I'm not too fussed about him. But, he is a punt if you want to go there. Next is Enzo Fernandez, and perhaps his missus was holding him back. 3 attacking returns now in the last 2 appearances, and his first league start since game week 7. Again, not particularly exciting pick, but again, could sort of go under the radar with returns during spells at times. So, I'd expect him to get a couple more returns before New Year's, but you may get frustrated trying to get him in at the right time that they come, because he could pop up at any time. But again, for the larger leagues, definitely one to consider. And then again on the Wolves hype with Joao Gomez, if you want a very reliable way into that Wolves midfield or that Wolves attack, he's definitely someone to consider, but he's never really been, and likely never will be, prolific in terms of his attacking output. Really just flagging because I know he'll be high on people's radar, similar to Ismail Assar after having his big week versus Fulham with a goal and assist, but the underlying numbers really don't support bringing him in, and he's also 1 yellow card away from a 1-match ban holiday too. So, yeah, but I mean, if you were in a really big league, 14, 15, 16, an interesting one to bring in for a month or 2. And then finally, that hidden gem striker I mentioned earlier on that could be a good little replacement is Patson Daka for Leicester. Finally got some minutes off the bench at the weekend against Chelsea. He's another one in a similar camp really to Wilson, who could be a very useful third striker, especially for larger leagues. With Vardy's minutes always having to be managed, there will be opportunities for Daka to start games soon and continue to come off the bench as well. Plus, he's got a little bit of proven Premier League pedigree, which is always nice. Finally, the most hidden gem pick. And at this point in the season, because of how engaged the 16-team leagues are, we really do start having to scrape the barrel here for a most hidden gem pick. So the player I've gone with no real conviction or enthusiasm, especially as a Spurs fan, is Ethan Nwaneri for Arsenal. Just 3% rostered in 16-team leagues. Got his first Premier League goal in Game Week 12 against Forest. Just 60 minutes of Premier League football so far, but in the EFL Cup has been a lot better. He scored 3 and 2. That has to be said. That has been against Championship caliber opposition. I think outside of Odegaard, Rice, Marino, Trossard obviously drops back at times as well. He seems to be the next choice and someone that I think we'll continue to see getting 5, 10, 15 minutes off the bench at times, especially I think in games where they're comfortable, maybe they're 2 or 3-0 up with 80 minutes on the clock. He could definitely get thrown on. And obviously, given the fact that he's only 17 years old, is super hungry to get on the ball and not afraid to have a crack. So, yeah, just one to consider in the really big leagues. Nothing else to think about if you're in the majority of more conventionally sized leagues. But, he could be an injury or two away from being a lot more interesting. Predicted lineups at the time of recording this, and potentially even by the time this gets released onto YouTube and other podcast platforms, may have just about been updated. So I haven't looked at them yet due to the turnaround, but I will do that before I go to bed tonight, so that by the time you wake up on Wednesday, listening to the pod, having a look at the waivers, there should be some up-to-date Premier League lineups on the site. So that is it for this episode. Another reminder, the waiver deadline is at 6:30 UK time on Thursday the 28th ahead of Friday Night Football. So a Friday night game week deadline at 6:30 on the 29th. So don't forget that. And again, if you think that you're going to forget that because it's at an unusual time or you're going to be busy there, then do your waivers now. Put them in early. For those of you watching on YouTube who are new to the channel, make sure you're subscribed and give us a thumbs up if you've enjoyed this content and don't want to miss out on any future episodes. Equally, for those of you that this isn't your first time, if you're not subscribed, make sure you are. It does help us get out there to more eyes and ears. And for those listening on the audio, make sure you're following on whichever podcast platform you listen to, again, so that you get notified when new episodes are released. So, no further from me. Not a lot of time before Thursday now. Good luck for your matchups this weekend. I've got a big matchup at the weekend in the Draft FPL Content Creator League that's been going for 2 seasons now. Going into its 3rd season now. I won season 1. Jay at Auto Draft won season 2, and the two of us go head to head this coming weekend. I finally managed to claw myself up to first place on goal difference, which is nice. So now I need to try and solidify that with another big game week, but it will be tough. So best of luck for your matchups, and as always, stay sure.